Hello there, Drew Hanish of Whiskey Lore, and time for another whiskey tasting and some advice. I was doing a book signing this weekend at Barnes & Noble for my two books, the Experiencing Irish Whiskey and Experiencing Kentucky Bourbon, available on Amazon, but I was at Barnes & Noble, and actually my local Greenville Barnes & Noble has plenty of copies if you'd like to go out and get some, and signed, actually, which is kind of cool. But while I was doing the signing, I had an opportunity to chat with some people about whiskey, and they would walk up and they would see Irish whiskey and bourbon, and immediately they would say, "Do you have a book on Scotch?" "I like Scotch." And I go, "Oh, no, don't have a book on Scotch. Scotch, there's a lot of distilleries, so that's going to be an ambitious book to do in the future. Maybe I will do them by regions, something like that." But then I would have people come up and they would go, "Oh, you know, I like bourbon. I like Irish to a certain extent, or I don't know Irish, and I don't like Scotch because it's too harsh." Now, Scotch drinkers, have you heard this from bourbon drinkers before? Scotch is too harsh. Where does that come from? Probably the moment that sticks out the most in my head was the time that I was visiting a friend of mine. We went to his next door neighbors. He was sharing with me some great expensive bourbons, and I mentioned something about Scotch, and he said, "Well, I got one bottle of Scotch, but I don't drink it, it's too harsh." And I said, "Well, what's that whiskey?" And he said, "It's Johnny Walker Blue," which to me is like nothing, you know, and I'm sitting here drinking George T. Stagg, and now all of a sudden it's like, wait a second, you're telling me Johnny Walker Blue is too harsh? I'm not getting it. Where is this term harsh coming from? And in fact, I think in a lot of ways for bourbon drinkers, it is kind of their outward, the same way that the word smooth is an inward for novice drinkers. I sense that it comes from not really having experienced too many scotches, maybe a couple. Maybe somebody tried to turn you onto a peated scotch right off the bat, and that is where the harsh is coming in. I would love to hear your comments below if you've bumped into people who have said that they won't really taste a scotch because they think it's too harsh. What their reasoning was if you asked them, and if you are a bourbon drinker and you haven't touched scotch and you're looking at this video and you're saying, okay, you know, what's his suggestion going to be? What is harsh? Just like with smooth, which is not very well defined in terms of a term, I mean, smooth can mean just about anything. So what does harsh mean? What is the meaning behind the word harsh? Is the flavor too aggressive? Is it not sweet enough for you? Is it too smoky and you don't like smoky? That's what you got to kind of determine. You have to get past these simple words and get a little bit more specific on what it is you don't like, or mention the brand. What is the brand that you were drinking? And, you know, if you're drinking Johnny Walker Red, you might not be having a great experience, and that's not a whiskey that a Scotch drinker might first turn you onto to get you interested in Scotch. So there's a lot of variables at play here, and I am a passionate believer that it's just like with music to me. Every style of music, there is a song that's going to hit you and make you go, I don't really like that genre, but I like that song. Something about that song really sticks out to me, and I think it's going to be the same way for you with Scotch, bourbon. I mean, the same thing happens when I'm talking to Scotch fans and they're like, bourbon, too sweet. Okay, well, that's a little more specific, but you do realize that not all bourbons are sweet, that there are bourbons that are drier, and there are bourbons that will have different characteristics that are going to stand out with them. And so the blanket statement doesn't really work for me. So I have two whiskeys sitting here. These are two whiskeys that I think are the perfect starter whiskeys for people who say that Scotch is too harsh, that you're a bourbon drinker and you think Scotch is too harsh. One of them is going to surprise you unless you're a longtime watcher of this channel. The other one may not surprise you, but you may not be aware of it. And when I started drinking scotch, the first scotch that I attached myself to was Macallan. So I was drinking Macallan 12 on the rocks. That just was like my easy to get into Scotch whiskey. It didn't bother me so much. As time's gone on, I had actually gone to the store to buy myself a bottle of Macallan 12, but there was another whiskey that was sitting right next to it that sounded somewhat similar. It was a sherry cask finished whiskey, and so I thought, well, let me get that because it costs a little bit less. It's in a prettier bottle, and I'm not one that always goes for the number one. In other words, as a baseball fan, I will not be a New York Yankees fan. I can't do it. I'm sorry. It's the team everybody who doesn't know anything about baseball knows about. Dallas Cowboys, same thing. I'm sorry. I just can't do it. Or let's talk about the like Manchester United. For a long time, when I was picking out my first Premier League team to root for, I could not root for Man U because it was like, at that time, the team everybody talked about. So I'm like, no, I'm going to go find a team that's a little more scruffy than that and one that might have a chance to kind of move up through the ranks. So I did that with my whiskey choice. And so this is the whiskey that I am going to suggest, which is GlenDronach 12. And the reason I think GlenDronach 12 is a great entry for a bourbon fan is because, not because it's going to have bourbon-esque character to it, but because it's not going to have a flavor you're used to. It is going to maybe be a little bit more wine-like in some ways, and it is going to be a sweeter whiskey, but not overly sweet. But the idea here is to jar you and make you go, wait a second, Scotch whiskey is a lot different than that Johnny Walker Red I tried, or, you know, that there is a, there's a variety, and I should not stereotype all Scotch whiskey as being the same thing, because it's not. It's a very diverse type of spirit. And so what you're going to get on the nose with this is a lot more of kind of that sweet, when you nose it, you're going to be probably thinking more of those kind of wine notes. But it is a whiskey, and it is, so you're going to get fruit in this. You're going to get a lot of fruits. There's a nice mix of light fruits and dark fruits. You get some berries, you get some plum and fig and those kinds of things in here. And like I say, this is going to reset your mind to what Scotch whiskey is. It's going to run you probably around $70 a bottle. Looks nice on the shelf. Impress your friends and say, yeah, I've moved beyond bourbon. Whether you stay away from bourbon, I'm not telling you to stay away from bourbon. I'm just trying to expand your horizons a little bit. Nice, easy drinker. Do not call it smooth. Flavor, nice flavor impact to it. Some people love GlenDronach 15 more. If you want more of an oaky kind of a note, if you want more wood influence, then that might be the way that you go. But this is going to sweeten and I think make you go, there's a little peppery note on the end. It'll remind you of maybe that little pepperiness that comes in from a rye whiskey. But to me, again, this is an idea that I want you to reset your thinking and go, okay, Scotch is not all the same. I used to send people first to Auchentoshan and American Oak because it really does have a lot of bourbon-esque characteristics to it, or I would send them to an Irish whiskey. But honestly, dive into the pool. And if you really want to dive into the pool, then you will do this second one. And I have suggested this whiskey before for bourbon drinkers, and it's because I actually went to a bourbon event and I was I had 2 products with me, and one of them was a peated Scotch. And I said, you know what? I'm going with the peated Scotch, and I'm gonna get people to understand this in terms that they understand, which is barbecue and bourbon. The 2 go together like hand in glove. Well, guess what? If you can find a peated whiskey that is not a medicinal whiskey, and this will surprise some people, that this particular one, which comes from Islay in Scotland, are basically, when you think Islay, you think medicinal whiskeys for the most part. But this distillery does not get their grain peated on Islay, so it doesn't get that same ocean characteristic to it. It's more of a foresty kind of a smoke, and so it reminds you much more of a barbecue, and that is Port Charlotte. Don't let the name scare you. Heavily peated 10-year. The 10 years in this bottle, or in a barrel, tamp down that peat. So don't go rushing for Ardbeg Wee Beastie right off the bat and get a face full of peat, but instead, step back, get used to smoky, get into that mindset of barbecue and smoke, nose it first. That's always my thing, is for the bourbon fan, get that mindset of barbecue and then nose it. And I swear, people's eyes light up and they're like, wow, I get it. And the reason that they get it is because I prepared them for it. And that's the number one thing that you have to do, is you have to know this is not going to taste like any other whiskey you have ever had. We're kind of doing that here. We're not trying to ease you in and make you go, oh, I'm going to taste this bourbon like Scotch. What good does that do? All that does is keep you kind of slowly walking in. Or the other thing that's a really bad idea, which is get something like a Johnny Walker Black, and it has a little smoke to it, and it's an off-putting note for people. Get used to the smoke first with a lot of it, and then step yourself back, and then you'll appreciate the Johnny Walker Black a little bit more, because you'll go, oh, yeah, that reminds me of that peat note that I found so wonderful within the Port Charlotte. Just about everybody that I turned on to this at the Bourbon Festival said, I got to buy a bottle of that. And it's inexpensive too. It's going to be, I mean, I say inexpensive versus today's bourbons, as expensive as those are getting, you know, paying $60 for something that you're getting from overseas actually isn't so bad when you'd be paying, what was it, Jack Daniel's Barrel Proof Rye just came out, and this is 100 proof, by the way. When their Barrel Proof Rye came out recently, now that's $60 a bottle. So, and it's a 700 ml bottle, and this is still a 750 ml bottle. So there you go. But just really nice barbecue notes to this. That smoke is pleasant. It doesn't smell like a burnt tire or like a big clump of burning seaweed. It's just really, really nice notes there. On the palate, you'll get some of those caramel notes coming in just a little bit. This is aged in a combination of different types of barrels. A little French oak in there, but also has the American oak ex-bourbon as well. And I get some like chocolate notes in there on top of what I'm getting with that smoke. The smoke just lays there nicely. And like a friend of mine said at one time when I had him try Laphroaig, and he really jumped into the medicinal side of things with the Laphroaig, he sat there just, I asked him, why are you not sipping on the drink that you have after I let him sample my Laphroaig? And he was like, man, just a very pleasant experience. And that's what you'll get out of that smoke after you get to appreciate it. So that's my advice. Do you guys have advice for bourbon drinkers? Do you think I'm going a bit too far and trying to push them a little too far into the deep end of the pool on these things? Or do you feel like this is kind of the way to go? And what do you suggest to bourbon drinkers to get them into Scotch? And what Scotches or Scotch drinkers who have gotten into bourbon, what bourbon first got you into Scotch? Those are interesting questions that I would love to hear your answers for. Hope you enjoyed this video today. Happy Memorial Day to everybody in the U.S. that hopefully had a really pleasant weekend. Got more videos on the way. Still working on my Tennessee whiskey history book, so, you know, going to be doing less interviews probably over the next couple of weeks because this is intense. I'm on chapter 13 right now. Just finally started talking about Jack Daniel, and then I had to jump in and do a little extra research on him because there's some fascinating stuff that kind of changes his story just a little bit, that from the story that we know, and I'm having to dig in really deep to try to figure out the reason why those changes came about so I can write about them in the book. But anyway, fun stuff coming up with that. Again, thanks for watching. Subscribe if you'd like to watch more of these videos down the road. I'd love to give lots of history, sometimes give tasting advice and that sort of thing, and doing the tastings as well. And until next time, cheers and Slainte. Nice mouthfeel. A little heat bar in there too, actually. I like that.